And yeah, so I'm going to talk today about some EV myths that are not really for the lay people. They're more for engineers, educated people, interested people, perhaps supporters of environmental causes. If you spend any time in the EV space like I do, there is like so much propaganda against new technologies, and a lot of it's really ridiculous and includes things like EVs are un-American, unsafe, tools of international espionage, and spread 5G. So this is not what we're talking about today. A lot of these questions came to me from my family, my friends who are fellow scientists and engineers, and so I'm going to use some data to attack the problem. Speaking of data, I am here today on behalf of my company, Recurrent, which is a team of scientists and data scientists and mission-driven advocates who are looking to get more happy EV drivers, better trust in used electric vehicles in particular, and transparency about battery data. And how do we do this? Our main thing is we monitor electric cars that are on the road today using their onboard telematics and onboard devices. And we get the data from the cars and we build machine learning regression models to try to understand their range degradation and through that to understand their battery degradation. We also have a huge education and advocacy component, which I largely lead up. We have education for all stages of EV drivers, shoppers, owners. And if you go to recurrentauto.com/research, you could find a bunch of articles that my team of writers has written about all sorts of topics like charging efficiency. And the way we actually make money is we work with electric car dealers and fleets and auction houses to provide battery condition reports for used electric vehicles. And we do that using the data we get from our owners and drivers by their telematics. Who am I? I'm the content marketing manager at Recurrent, and so I lead up research, regulatory affairs. So recently we've been working with the IRS and a lot of interest groups about the Inflation Reduction Act, particularly the new tax credits for used electric vehicles. And I manage a team of awesome writers and do a lot of writing myself. I have a master's degree in atmospheric science and climate modeling. I am now an amateur battery scientist, and I love it, and a retired mathematician. So on the internet, when you're in the world of Facebook trolls, there's this term called FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And EVs are really at the center of it. There are some ridiculous lies, scandalous lies being spread about electric cars. But the things I'm going to talk about today are all kind of science-backed approaches to genuine questions people have. The first is going to be that batteries don't last, and you just have to throw them out after a few years. The second is going to be that EVs will make the grid collapse, which I'm going to build upon the first speaker's comments on that. The third being a dirty grid makes EVs useless. And the fourth topic is going to be that since EVs are a new technology and they don't meet all of our use cases, we might as well wait to push adoption. So after each sort of myth, I'll pause and see if anybody has burning questions that will completely derail the rest of the talk. And I'll also hold some time for questions at the end. All right, so the first myth is that EV batteries don't last. And you guys have all heard this, that EV batteries are just like cell phone batteries. You have to throw them away. They're going to clutter up our landfills and our dumps. And very quickly, they won't hold a charge. And the truth is that phone batteries and EV batteries are designed very differently. Phone batteries, which are also lithium-ion batteries, are built for use, and EV batteries are built for longevity. And Recurrent collects data on cars that have been on the road for over 10 years, and most of them still get 80 to 90% of their original capacity. So on a 100 kilowatt hour battery, they're still getting 80 to 90 kilowatt hours of energy. That's usually around 300 miles of range. So, you know, the expected lifespan should be at least 20 years for most EVs. And then there is second life for the batteries. So this is one of my favorite questions that I've gotten. And it's, hey, you know, everybody has a cell phone. We know that like after 2 years, it will not hold a charge, and it's time to trade it in for a new one. So cell phone batteries are lithium-ion batteries, EV batteries are lithium-ion batteries. Why should we expect that this car battery is going to last longer than a cell phone battery? And the first thing is by design. So it's not really altruism or concern about like material waste that makes battery manufacturers want them to last longer. EV batteries in the US are federally mandated to be warranted for 8 years or 100,000 miles. So Ford and GM and Tesla and Rivian don't want to pony up the cash to replace the EV batteries. They want them to last for at least the duration of the warranty term. How do they do this? Well, they use two design principles. The first is thermal management. And one of the things we know about all batteries, and particularly lithium-ion batteries, is that they hate heat. And so the batteries that are in your EV have a robust thermal management system around them that continually finds out what the temperature of the battery is and either cools it or warms it up. And different cars do this in different ways. Some just use air, some use liquid cooling, but they all have these thermal management systems that also control the voltage, cell balancing, and all sorts of things to keep batteries healthy. The second consideration, which I will dive into much more deeply, is something called depth of discharge, which is really just how much of a battery you use before you recharge it. So if you go from 80% to 30% twice, you have used 50% depth of discharge twice, and you've used a full cycle. Most people use a lot more of their cell phone batteries at one time than they do of their car batteries. And in fact, with lithium-ion batteries, the less depth of discharge you use at a time, the longer it will last. And that's not just linear. It's not that if you use 50%, it will last twice as long. They actually are happier and remain electrochemically stable longer. All right, but now for fun, let's ask the same question and get a different answer. So do EV batteries last longer than cell phone batteries? And I'm gonna say no, they don't. We're actually just measuring battery life wrong. All right, so I'm gonna dive a little bit deeper into this issue of depth of discharge. And for some context, the technical way to measure battery longevity is called cycle life. And a lot of times you talk about equivalent full cycle life. So going from 100 to 0% is one full cycle, going from 80 to 30, and then 80 to 30 is also one equivalent cycle because you've done half a cycle twice. The conventional wisdom with lithium-ion batteries is that they should last around 500 full cycles max over its lifetime. If you're running shorter depths of discharge, they could be expected to last between 700 to 1,000 full cycle equivalents. So in battery science, the end of life is usually considered when 80% of the battery capacity is left. When it comes to EVs, end of life is generally when it gets to the warranty cutoff, which is usually 70% of its original capacity. And of course, with your cell phone, end of life is when it doesn't hold a charge long enough to go to the grocery store. So let's run through this quick calculation. How many times a day do you charge your cell phone battery? Well, when it's new, like the first year you have it, you don't even use the full charge all day. So let's say for the first year you have a cell phone, it gets 200 full cycles. All right, now you're getting into your second year and suddenly the battery capacity is really dropping and you now have to charge it 2 times a day. And maybe if you want to be really generous, you're charging it 2 full cycles a day. This means that in 2 years, you're running around 1,000 equivalent full cycles on your battery. And that's about when lithium-ion batteries start to really peter out. And now let's look at an EV. And I just have some assumptions here in terms of sort of regional average daily driving. So let's assume 30 miles a day, 6 days a week. You have 180 driving miles a week. And let's very generously and very conservatively assume you get 200 miles for 60% of your battery. So you're only charging it up to 80% and down to 20%. So you need 1 full charge a week. With these numbers, it's going to take 20 years to hit 1,000 equivalent full cycles. That's 10 times longer. So the amount you use your cell phone in 2 years, it takes 20 years to use an EV battery that much. So going back to our question, do EV batteries last longer than cell phone batteries? No, not if you are measuring batteries in cycle life. Okay, so Recurrent sort of was built on this principle that we could build degradation models for vehicles, and then somebody could get, once we have enough data, we could look at a vehicle, get some data points, and locate it on a degradation curve. On the left-hand side here is an idealized degradation curve for a lithium-ion battery, and it kind of goes through 3 phases. There's an initial drop-off in range, a very long, flat, almost flat linear decline in capacity, and then there's a steep decline at the end of life. We have never seen batteries at the end of life in a car. We've maybe seen 1 or 2 where there's been a failure issue, but most of the EV batteries we're looking at are in that middle linear decline. So on the right is actual real data that we have from all the Tesla Model S 100 kilowatt hours in our fleet. And this is a plot of the dashboard estimated range versus odometer. And you could see it goes up to around 120,000 miles. So that's at least a 10-year-old car. And it's still getting around 300 miles per charge. That's around 80% of its original capacity. So that's not that bad. I don't know about everybody in this room, but when was the last time you drove 300 miles without stopping? I drove 70 miles to get here today, and that was plenty for me. I stopped once. Okay, my final piece of data about how long EV batteries last is that we also get data on battery replacements from our drivers. And there are actually just very few batteries that are failing. So the Chevy Bolt and the Kona EV are highlighted because those actually had manufacturer recalls due to battery defects. But other than that, even the Nissan Leaf, which is famed for having passive cooling in its thermal management and has been on the road since 2011, under 5% battery replacements. Now, I'll caveat this and say that this is the drivers who are enrolled in our program are a self-selecting group. We at Recurrent, we're nerds. Our drivers are largely nerdy people who love data. But we're really seeing for most vehicles around, I think the average is a 1.5% replacement rate. All right. Yes.
So this rate, right? It's how old are these cars? What data are you?
So these go back. We have all different model years in our fleet. I actually just yesterday ran the numbers by year. And the older cars do have a higher rate of replacement, but I think the maximum going back to 2012 is 7%. So it's, you can also, I'm going to be publishing something on this that will have more in-depth data about the age of batteries too. But I did not have time to include it in this presentation. Yeah.
What should they do with the manufacturer recalls?
That is a great question. I'm not 100% sure. I know that companies like Redwood Materials are starting up battery recycling plants. I would imagine that they're taking them back to their own recyclers to reuse the materials, would be my guess. The materials are valuable enough at this point that there's an ability to monetize the reuse. All right, let me move ahead. Okay, the next myth I'm going to tackle is one that I affectionately call grid woes. Part 1, and this is the myth that the grid isn't ready for everyone to go electric, and that just look, California asked people to stop using their EVs during a heat wave. How can we put more EVs on the road? And the truth is there are a lot of really irrefutable studies showing that the maximum increase in electric consumption, if everyone went electric tomorrow, would be 30%. Bloomberg quotes that at 25% for full electric penetration. National Grid said that by the time 80% of the US owns an EV, consumption will increase 10 to 15%. So it remains to be seen exactly how this plays out, but as I mentioned in the end of the last session, electricity consumption has been over the past decade in this country declining, and generation has been increasing. So this should not be a problem from a generation standpoint. The electric grid really does need an overhaul, especially as environmentalists and climate conscious people make a push to electrify more and more. That is a real concern. But the generated capacity is there. All right, so I don't know if everybody here remembers, but those of us in EVs certainly do. In September of this year, there was an unprecedented heat wave in California that coincided nicely with recent news that California was going to ban gas cars starting in 2035. Specifically ban the sale of new gas cars, let me be precise. FUD had a field day on this news. You know, pretty much how can we be mandating electric cars if we can't even charge the ones we have? The truth of the matter was this. California asked electric car drivers, of which there were over 1 million, not to charge for 5 hours between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. Solar energy that powers a lot of California's grid declines. During a heat wave, just because the sun sets, it doesn't mean that it gets cooler. So people still needed to use air conditioning. There were no mandates about car charging. It was a request. So I want to walk quickly. I wonder if I can show you this. 1 second. Oh. Okay. So I'm going to talk quickly about what effect the EVs have on the grid. And in climate science, we do this thing called, we look at analogs, and analogs are 2 scenarios where the initial conditions are similar, and then we see factors affect them. So this is August 22nd, 2018. In LA, there was a high of 82 degrees. The peak electricity demand, which is usually or 5.
No. They're poorly designed.
Is that something I can manage? No, that's not you.
You need to mute someone.
Yes, please.
Notice your speaker isn't muted.
Did my speaker be muted?
I don't know.
I don't, yeah, no, okay, yeah, no, I'm going with the head taker over there, okay. All right, I'm gonna, it doesn't start up again, okay. August 22nd, 2018. Peak energy demand, peak electric demand in California was 39,000 megawatts, and there were 450,000 EVs on the road. Jump ahead. Okay, let's jump ahead around 4 years. Again, we have a high of 82 degrees in LA, and peak demand is 41,000 megawatts, so not that much higher, but now we have over 1 million EVs on the road. So what happened in these 4 years? From 2018 to 2022, EV adoption increased 120%, peak demand only increased 5%, and in those same 4 years, solar production in the state increased 30%, which is more than enough to cover the additional demand. In fact, the California Air Resources Board, which was the one that helped with the mandate to ban the sale of new gas cars, said that even if there are 5 million EVs on the road, they would only account for around 7% of annual electric use and 1% of peak demand. So we have the energy for this. We have the generation capacity. What's the problem here? There are 2. The adoption of EVs is not spread out evenly geographically. There are regions that are having more EVs adopted more quickly, and this varies zip code by zip code in the same state. It's largely tied to socioeconomics. And the second problem is that the grid is shifting, particularly in California, to renewables. So in the evening, solar production really plummets, and people still need AC to cook dinner and do homework. Well, they need electricity for all of those things. However, yes.
I was in marketing a long period of time. I can't remember ever seeing an ad on TV for a good vehicle.
Really? That's That's so funny, because when I go to the movies, every single ad before the movies is for an electric. Yeah, I don't have cable TV. I don't have cable TV, so I can't speak to that.
And I would imagine the majority of people said to go like this too as well.
Yeah,
And I've yet to see anything, you know, in electric vehicle advertising.
what about anybody else? Because I don't,
Could you repeat the question?
the question is, this person is saying that they have never seen an electric vehicle advertised on TV, on cable TV.
I've seen a few.
I've seen them, I haven't seen, Tesla doesn't advertise, they don't need to advertise.
They just create controversy.
But I mean,
I've seen them.
I see,
Yeah.
you know, I see the VW ones,
Okay.
I see, the Kia one.
I've seen Cadillac.
Genesis did a whole bunch when they were introducing their GV60.
Okay, so maybe ask them what channels they're watching.
Well, this is true. I mean, you can watch for techie type TV and then the general population. It's far out strips the narrow focus.
You ain't gonna see them on Fox, all right?
I don't see them anywhere.
Well, I see them. I do see them.
I've seen them.
A lot of people see them. Apparently, you're tuning in channels that don't have.
I think there was a big advertising push during the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I know that, I know that a few years ago, it made a lot of headlines in the electrification industry because the Super Bowl was all EV ads.
Yeah,
That's you too.
I know back in 2022, for the former Super Bowl, there was 7 EV ads compared to the last Super Bowl, but there was only 3.
Only 3.
Okay.
All right.
You know, I think it's also that's an indication that they're becoming more commonplace, that they're not being advertised as EVs, they're just being advertised as cars.
Yeah, that's possible.
So,
Not all advertising dollars are spent on television.
Yeah, I think that's shifting probably too. All right, I'm gonna try to get back on track here for a second. So I was talking about how the problem is not really electricity generation, it's more about the time of use. And so like a frequent concern you'd have is like, what if there's a tidal wave coming and we can't wait to charge our cars? Like we need to go now. So as a quick thought experiment, let's say that we take all the 1 million+ EVs in California and charge them at the same time. And so there's a tidal wave coming, we need to charge now. First of all, this is literally impossible. There are not enough EV chargers in California to do this. But if there were, a single level 2 charger draws around, on average, 10 kilowatts of power at a time. So that pencils out to 10,000 megawatts, which is still less than the solar generation in California alone on sunny days. So it's really all about when we need to use the energy. And yes,
In the first line, do you mean how much power would it take?
yes.
Energy should have been power.
Yeah, I borrowed this from an article we wrote.
You may have missed the beginning of my talk where I made a big deal about the distinction of those terms.
That's good. I have like a little sticky on my computer about that because I'm not an electrical engineer.
Physicists, great finicky.
Yes. Mathematicians don't use units. It was quite a shock when I switched to science. All right, so the nice thing about renewables and EVs is if you have more renewable energy, the real problem you run into is storage. And what are EVs if not large batteries on wheels? So there are a couple of ways that EVs can actually add stability to the grid. The first one, which I think you also spoke about a little bit, is managed charging. And managed charging is actually something that's already going on. You can both have your car know when electricity rates are cheapest and charge then, or there are also pilot programs going on with utilities that actually give drivers money to charge when demand is lowest. And this is similar to the demand response programs we're often enrolled in for thermostats over the summer. During that same heat wave in September in California, there was a pilot program in effect in the Bay Area that offset 5 megawatts of demand from EV customers and compensated them pretty nicely for shifting their charge time. So they could still come home and plug in their car. the charger would just not start charging until later in the night.
While PSE and G had a program like that on air conditioners.
Yep.
They could squelch your air conditioner at times that they would suffer an overload.
Yeah.
They do it today in New Jersey, specifically for EVs, so. you-
Oh, yeah, cool.
That's, I talked about that in my.
I did not have access to your slides, so I'm so sorry for duplicating your screen.
That's okay, I don't know.
The other cool technology that is actually the reason I got into electric vehicles is V2G, which stands for vehicle to grid. This technology is still nascent, but we're starting to hear about it. This is basically when you use your car like the battery that it is. You can power devices, you could power a generator. Ford has a system where you could power your home off grid using your car battery. Or ultimately, you can even send energy back to the grid and arbitrage that and make some money. There was a big pilot over in Brooklyn and Red Hook last year between a couple of companies that was sending energy back to the New York City grid. PG&E has a 1,000-person pilot that's starting in the next year and a half, to allow people to power their own property temporarily when there's an electric outage. And you can earn up to $3,000 upfront, and then an additional couple of thousand for actually participating in the program. So I'm sure it will not be quite that lucrative when this catches on mainstream.
Can it link in with your solar charging, your solar system on your house then?
You need to have a smart grid to do that. So part of the reason that this technology is still nascent is one, not a lot of EVs have the transformer to send energy back out yet. And the other reason is that a lot of the hardware is still really expensive. So Tesla did just announce that starting in 2025, all of their cars will have V2G capability. So that was last week. And Ford is running pilot programs with F-150s in Florida and California. So this is really exciting to think down the line. Things like fleet vehicles and buses in particular are kind of ripe for this because they have very fixed schedules. You know when they're going to be used, you know when they're not going to be used. Buses in particular have huge batteries, and there's hopes that nonprofits, hospitals, schools can not only provide their own electricity they can power up with renewables and then provide it back for free to their institutions, but also arbitrage it back to the grid and support themselves in case of emergencies. So this technology does take coordination and regulation, and the technology is pretty much there. You know, there are still expenses and some adoption required, but it's exciting to know that it's possible. All right, I'm gonna move on unless there are questions about the grid woes part 1. All right, I'm gonna jump quickly to grid woes part 2 because I saw that the first session in fact touched upon my main 2 slides for this one. So grid woes part 2 is because the grid is still powered by gas and very occasionally by coal, EVs are still polluting. And this was a question that my friend who's an engineer for the city of New York asked me, so no slouch. And this all comes down to efficiency. And this is my favorite chart in the entire world. It's courtesy of the Department of Energy, which is one of our favorites at Recurrent.
I had the same one.
I know, this is the one that I walked by and I saw you had it.
By the way, if you notice in mine, I erased the word fuel and I put in original energy.
Yeah, that's a little bit more to the point.
Yeah.
So in a combustion engine, you can kind of just mostly speaks for itself.
No, I'm
here.
sorry, in this one in this one I did read fuel, the other one I changed, yeah.
So you're really only getting at best 25% of the energy you put into a combustion engine out going to the wheels. You lose around 70% of it to the engine losses, and that's mostly heat. If you ever touch a car that's just been running, it's really hot. But let's contrast that to an electric car, where if you put it 100% out of the 100% of the energy you put in, you're getting out around 90%. And this comes down to the fact that electric motors are just much more efficient. And also this neat thing called regenerative braking, which is when the car actually harnesses the energy, the lost kinetic energy when you're slowing down, and sends it back to the battery. So it's not really recharging it, but you're recouping lost energy. So that's pretty cool. The other related
Interesting
myth
argument.
that's not really a myth is a note. Sorry, this is just a note. One of the other myths we hear, oh yeah, I'm sorry.
Going back to the other slide,
Yeah.
you show 100% of the energy going into the car, but if you're getting it from the grid. The energy is actually going into the power generation. So how much of that is lost power generation and grid?
If you want to, I would go with,
I-
yeah. No, go for it.
I had a slide in my show, which was just before this one, I guess you weren't here. No, if you have conventional power station with just a simple Rankine cycle, possibly with reheat and superheat, you're going to get a 40% thermodynamic efficiency and 40%. So 40% of the energy value of the fuel you're putting in is going into to the grid at electricity. And it turns out that if you multiply all that out, the electric vehicle still gives you 1.5 times the work per amount of fuel consumed as if you burn that fuel on board your car in an auto cycle engine. Still win, the electric still wins. And if it's a high efficiency generating station with a binary cycle, that is a steam turbine whose exhaust is still hot enough to fire a gas turbine whose exhaust is still hot enough to fire the boiler of a steam cycle, then you can get double.
And just another thing to add to that is that you're not even considering the cost of getting the fuel to the gas station.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, there's additional energy to trade with you.
Trucking the gas to the station.
Yeah.
Right.
And processing it. And so that leads nicely into this next concern about cobalt mining as a humanitarian disaster. And well, yes, it is. Mining for the minerals that we need to make electric vehicles is an extractive process. It causes real harm to people and to environments, and there are real emissions associated with it. In fact, making an electric vehicle battery from scratch is about double the emissions as making a gas car. That pencils out in about 2 years to be equal. But I'd like to say that gas drilling is also a humanitarian disaster. And there are tons of associated emissions with gas fuel drilling. So the industry is looking to address this. There are a couple of ways that it is doing so. The first is the transition away from cobalt-based batteries to lithium-ion batteries, which have some nice other side effects like being more resistant to fast charging and degrading more slowly. The second is building up a recycling industry, which in the past month, there was exciting news that came out of Redwood Materials. Redwood Materials just got over $2 billion in federal funding to develop lithium-ion battery recycling. And they did a pilot over 2022 that showed that more than 95% of lithium, cobalt, nickel, and copper alone could be recycled and reused, and that the products made with those recycled batteries were as good, if not better, than the originals. So there is some hope. The last thing I'll add about recycling is that I do a lot of work on the Inflation Reduction Act. One of the requirements for new electric cars to be eligible for funding under the Inflation Reduction Act is that they have to include a certain percentage of battery materials that are processed or recycled in the US. And this is pretty cool because it essentially productizes the recycling industry in the US because it gives battery recyclers somebody to sell the materials to. Whereas prior to that, there was not really enough scale to productize recycling. So I'm hopeful it will take a few years. As we discussed in myth 1, we don't really have a lot of EV batteries that need to be recycled just yet. But when they get to that point, I'm hopeful that recycling will be able to take off. Yeah.
Your first bullet, transition away from cobalt-based batteries. So where do we stand today in market penetration? What's cobalt versus lithium?
So the thing with lithium ion, it has slightly lower energy density, which means that you need a little bit more, I think it's 30% more battery to go the same distance, to have the same energy capacity. So Tesla is using it in its standard range Model 3 and Model Y. Actually, the Model Y hasn't made it to the US yet, but it's using it overseas in the standard, the lithium ion or iron, the iron phosphate, sorry, I have too many words. And then Ford just announced that they're going to be switching in their Mach-E and the Ford 150, the F-150 in Europe to LFP batteries, and those will be coming to the US later. So it's slow, but people are really, I know a bunch of other, Rivian has talked about it, VW had talked about it a few years ago. That's possible. I know a lot of Chinese companies are using them in their China-made vehicles.
That's an interesting question there. Don't we have an issue with, we don't really have a lot of lithium in the United States.
We do not, it's
And
true.
we're buying it from China, basically.
Buying it from China, and any lithium that we get from China will render a vehicle ineligible for the federal
Right,
tax.
I'm just saying that that's an issue because they're and it's also another issue that's one of the reasons China's going to the moon. To mine lithium. No, seriously.
Do you know how much kerosene and liquid oxygen it takes to get a bloody rocket to the moon?
Well,
Well, regardless, hopefully, you know, the desire to have American-made or processed lithium will get recycling going in this country. I read a staggering statistic somewhere, like about the amount when a battery plant starts up, and there have been a ton of battery plants starting up in the US. And their first year, something like 80% of the batteries they make have to be scrapped.
mhm.
And so all of that can be sent to a recycling facility.
The interesting thing is I fly model airplanes and in our electric planes, we use lithium ion batteries and there's no way to recycle.
Yet,
There's no, because any of the battery recycling places don't take them.
I know yet. There's a big plant opening, I think near Rochester, that hopefully, New York, New Jersey.
Yeah, but there's no place to take them.
Yes,
Can you speak to, you mentioned that, these ones that use recycled cobalt
mhm.
perform as well, if not better. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the if not better?
So there was a study that came out, I think over the summer, that showed that and I don't have this like perfect, so you know, if you email me later, I can send it to you. But I think it had to do with when you recycle it down, you actually get more pure materials. I think that was it. It was one big study over the summer. So if you like just Google battery recycling, you know, cathode material, I think you should find it.
Thank you.
Yeah. And to everybody, if you want to email me for citations or questions afterwards, I love that stuff. It's why I'm here. So do you have a question? No? No, no? Okay, cool. Okay. The last point I'm going to make about extractive processes is this. People tend to buy more battery than they really need. And my example here is going to be the Hummer EV, whose efficiency is 47 miles per gallon equivalent, which almost overlaps with the most efficient gas cars. So for contrast, the 2023 Mitsubishi Mirage, which is a gas-only car, gets 39 miles per gallon. So the Hummer EV, although technically electric and it has no tailpipe emissions, is a terribly inefficient use of materials. You need to make a really big battery to make that thing go. And you know, on the other hand, you could have something like a Nissan Leaf, which is smaller. You get less range, it's true, but it meets 90% of most Americans' use cases. And with the money you save driving one, you can rent a gas car when you need to go on a long trip or go off-roading.
Well, because the Hummer EV has the crab walking features, it's a, what, 2-ton or 3-ton truck? I mean, it's reverting
I
back
think
to.
it's more because this was like 6.
Huh.
Like,
Yeah, I can see that, but it has so many features on the Hummer EV, it makes it more enticing and uses a lot more power to use it. So it's reverting back to its original Hummer face.
yeah, but just in general, you know, and there are portions of the country that like feel strongly to go big or go home, and perhaps it's places where we need to use critical minerals to go are not those places.
You understand, ma'am, that for a lot of these big gas hogs, including pickup trucks that are not used for business purposes, and Hummers and some of the big fat SUVs, the device is not a transportation vehicle. It's a prosthetic male part.
I do. This is why I say this is cultural and social shift. This is not a use shift. That is, you know. I won't speak to that from the podium. All right, the final myth I want to touch upon, and this is one that's very near and dear to my do-gooder heart. This is that the technology for EVs isn't there yet for everyone. You know, I'm a city dweller. I could not own an EV. It would not work with my lifestyle, unfortunately. So there's no reason to push for adoption today. And I'm going to counter that by saying that there is huge benefits to be had in terms of ground level air pollution. And that this is particularly important and particularly resonant for marginalized and underserved communities who have long suffered that ill health benefits of terrible ground level air quality due to transportation.
So that brings up another question
Yeah.
I keep hearing about from people is the idea of personal car ownership may be changing as well.
I mean, I would hope so, but I think there are places in this country where that change is going to be very slow and we don't have the time to wait. So the truth of this, I don't know why this thing keeps popping up, but millions of Americans, more than 40% of us suffer from poor air quality from transportation. Transportation air pollution is 55% of the NOx that we breathe in. There are also carcinogens, and that this does not affect everyone equally. People of color are 61% more likely to have unhealthy air, 3.6 times more likely to have the most unhealthy air. And a study done at George Washington University found, looking by zip code, that the least white areas in the country had NO2 levels almost 3 times higher than the most white. So there is a humanitarian issue here too. There was a big study done this year from the Keck School of Medicine that did one of the first ever real world studies looking at the effects of EV adoption and ground level air pollution. They looked at California from 2013 to 2019 when there was a 10-fold increase in electric vehicles. And they looked at zero emission vehicle registration based on zip code, air pollution levels, and asthma-related ER trips. And they found that for every additional 20 zero emission vehicles per 1,000 cars, there was over a 3% drop in asthma-related ER visits. This is huge for childhood asthma, for elderly people, for people who have cardiovascular issues. That's a very noticeable change and a very marginal increase in adoption. This study did not look at brake and tire particulates. Yes?
I'm not sure what you meant by marginalized and underserved communities, but as you pointed out earlier, the impoverished communities, although they're suffering the most from air pollution, are the ones least likely to buy EVs because of the cost.
Yes.
So is this really going to affect them until we get to the end stage where everyone has EVs?
2 points. The first point being that the communities that are often affected by poor air quality due to transportation are those that are located near highways and transit corridors. So yes, if people driving by their communities spew less stuff into their air, it will. It will also mean fewer refinery fumes, fewer gas drilling and manufacturing fumes. So it will. The study did find that in lower socioeconomic areas that had less EV adoption, there was less mitigation.
And as far as the price of cars, I priced a brand new Tesla, it was $57,000. I went out and priced a brand new minivan, it was $60,000. So they're really not that much more expensive.
On average, so I write a market report about the price of used electric cars every quarter. And the difference on average is still the average across all makes and models is still, I think, around 9,000 for new cars and around 11,000 for used cars. But to your point, part of the reason that Recurrent is so focused on used electric vehicle adoption is that there are more affordable options in the used market. 70% of the cars on the road today are used. And so if we want to have any sort of meaningful reduction in carbon or in transportation emissions, we need used cars to be part of that. But yes, that is true about the price. Also, communities that have lower socioeconomic levels generally spend a larger proportion of their budget on gas. which could be mitigated by programs that provide assistance for utilities for those communities. So it would be really nice to get EVs there. Yes.
Do you have any numbers of like what percentage of the fleet of electric cars is now in the secondhand ownership?
So, I do. I'm trying to remember them. I think I'm like running through spreadsheets while I'm up here. Let me get back to you on that. Yeah, I'll get your email and I'll send you some numbers, but the market is really taking off. I know that Q3 of 2022, there are around, I think it was 30% of the EVs that were sold were used. Yeah. All right, a few more stats about ground level air pollution, which I'm sure I don't need to convince anybody about this, but 2 different studies looked at the effect of California's electrification goals. And as a reminder, those are 2035, no new passenger vehicles, gas-powered passenger vehicles. By 2040, no new gas-powered heavy-duty vehicles. The American Lung Association looked specifically at medium and heavy-duty vehicles, which are around 60% of our ground level air pollution. We're talking billions in public health benefits, almost 2 million fewer asthma attacks, almost 70,000 fewer premature deaths. These are not tiny numbers.
So the one thing I've said about California's goals, they're great. But the one thing that's not in their legislation is improving the charging network.
Well, that's federal now. That was part of the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And there's, I think, there's a lot of there are plans in the works. Every state had to send in their budgetary plans for filling out public charging stations along EV corridors, which are major highways, every 50 miles. I'm happy to send you some information on this. I have some writers write up pieces this week. So that is being worked on. There's also a lot of incentives and funding for people to install home charging. For business, for commercial charging, there's a lot of money there. I think you can get, I want to say 50,000 as a commercial entity to install a charger. Yes.
What do you mean by lost work days?
So that's just people being sick, like decreased productivity because people are sick because their kid's having an asthma attack, because they're recovering from a heart attack, that sort of stuff.
Is there any way to ensure that all of these chargers that are being built are going to be maintained in the future? It seems like a big problem is there are chargers out there, and when normal people actually try to use them, they're either inoperable or don't perform very well, taking, 10 hours to charge a car.
So there are technical requirements as part of the federal funding program. I think it's 97 or 98% uptime is required, and there are minimum charging standards for both level 2 and level 3. So I think it's minimum of 150 kilowatts for fast chargers. So how they're going to enforce that remains to be seen, but I'm sure it will be economic. All right, my final slide here. The proceedings of the National Academy also looked at the California electrification goals, and they found even bigger numbers. They found trillions in public health benefits, almost 200,000 fewer premature deaths. And EVs also cut down on noise pollution, which affects wildlife and biodiversity and damages crops and agriculture, who also need air. And I think I have the wrong version of my slide, so I don't have my conclusion on here. But I'm going to end this by saying, why do people like to believe these EV myths so much? Why are they so compelling? And I don't really know the answer, but I want to throw out a suggestion. And it's that climate change and damage to the environment is really scary. And we all kind of want a silver bullet. And when we see a solution in front of us that's incremental and imperfect, we want to keep looking. And the fact is that real change is boring and real change is hard and it takes getting used to. EVs are not perfect, but they are a technology we have now, and we can measure benefits that they do have today. And so we absolutely need improvements in charging infrastructure. And we need solutions for city dwellers. And we need faster charging and better charging and lower impact mining and manufacturing. We need recycling. But it starts with people buying into the technology and then demanding accountability and transparency. All right, I'm happy to take
A
more.
lot of misinformation out there.
Yes. Yes, we're combating it one
I mean,
room
someone,
at a time.
All right.
So, guess what? I'm back. Okay, so I'm filling in on this next session while we wait for the speaker to arrive. So I would love, if anybody had questions they wanted to ask me. Yes.
So I did have a question that we didn't have a chance to get to, but it seems to me, as someone who doesn't run an EV, that the biggest innovation is this notion of depreciation of the vehicle, right? And so I don't know whether it's a myth or a reality that EVs depreciate much quicker. Fear of having to replace the battery. And I guess I'm curious if there's any economic methods or by which that fear would be addressed.
So I'm curious if you Googled me before asking that question, because I published this quarterly market report on used EV batteries. So you asked the right person.
Accept your credentials.
We're actually, so it's hard to speak on that too much, and here's why. EVs really have started to take off since the pandemic, and over the pandemic, there was this bizarre thing happening where used cars were actually appreciating. They're starting to come down now again, but they're not falling faster than the overall used car market. So actually, hold on.
It seemed, there was a time it seemed like you could pick up a BMW i3 or a Leaf prior to the pandemic.
Yep.
For a quarter of its list price, maybe 3-4 years out.
Yeah, so prices have fallen. These are Teslas only. I just happened to know that this was right here. And prices have fallen from their January 2022 numbers, but they're around where they were pre-pandemic. Actually, I think I have one handy for. So this chart actually shows going back to April 2021, which is when we started tracking prices. So they've fallen significantly since April 2021, but they are tracking pretty closely with the overall used car market. So I don't think depreciation, I think as people start to see that the batteries really do last and people start to understand that the batteries are warranted for 100,000 miles, I think that will disappear. Also, there's still like super supply constraint. So the demand is still outstripping, the supply a lot.
Related question.
Yeah.
Regarding. Appreciation, but more residual value. So when I was shopping for an EV this summer, some places it's really hard to get a lease estimate because I was looking at, after doing a lot of research, I was leaning towards a Hyundai i5. I ended up with a Genesis GV60, but in either case, both Hyundai, they were very reluctant to provide lease quotes. I think it was probably because they're having the projected residuals were just a big question mark.
Yeah.
So they were guesstimating a very low residual, which was kind of contrary to the trend in the luxury car market.
Yeah.
Where the residuals are typically high.
Yeah, and I think that everybody's having trouble projecting out 3 years right now, given the past 2 years of kind of like really like, I hate to use the word unprecedented, but unprecedented market trends where people were flipping like EVs all the time. You could buy like in the winter of 2022, if you bought a Mach-E, you could use it for 8 months and resell it and make money. Like, there's not a lot of precedent for that. So I think some of the companies are having trouble projecting out how far things are going to fall. We do know that the lease rates are generally higher for EVs, and I think that it speaks to people's anxiety about the new technology and about the longevity of the batteries. But it's great for the used EV market in 3 years.
The question is about batteries dying. I know at least if I had a Tesla, I've had it for 7 years. Now I've got 90% of the range that I had originally. So the batteries aren't on the way out.
No.
Yeah, I think there was, I can't recall, there was some report that found that the degradation was negligible.
Yeah.
And they're gonna, the projected, decay rate is closer to 20 years than 10.
And that
So-
decay is still only to like 70%.
That's right.
But it could also depend if you were in Phoenix.
It would, but a lot of the cars now have active thermal
yeah,
management.
yeah.
You know, if you have a Nissan Leaf, if you have a 2014 Nissan Leaf in Phoenix versus having a Tesla in Phoenix, the battery, you know, you're gonna use a lot more charge, so you will wind up cycling the battery more to use the thermal management, but that will pretty much cancel out having a comfortable battery temperature.
And if you're willing to entertain conspiracy theories, I sometimes wonder if the oil industry was saying, gotta watch out for these electric cars. The batteries, you're gonna replace them 5 times and stuff.
I don't think that's a conspiracy theory. We know that natural gas has been paying spokespeople to talk about how cooking on induction stoves is terrible. That's a real thing.
Yeah.
They've been paying influencers to talk about natural gas being a better cooking thing than induction. So I don't think that's a conspiracy theory to think that oil and gas is smearing EVs. Yes.
I've driven 50,000 miles with my Tesla Model Y in like 3 years, haven't seen like even a little bit of like range reduction, anything like that. So,
Yeah, that's.
Are there actual plug-in hybrid used car market? Or they are just not simple, like not enough cars?
No, there definitely are. And so that's like my company's whole business model is trying to build transparency and confidence in the used EV market. And it's a significant share at this point. I think annually we're talking.
EV, right?
Hmm?
Plug-in EV, right?
Yeah, yes, yeah. Sorry, as clarification, when I say EV, I mean plug-in hybrids and full battery electrics only. I keep seeing people with speaker thing walk in. If any of you are the actual speaker for this session, please let me know. Okay.
So in regards to, related to that question, I think, if you're talking about the S-curve for adoption.
Yep.
Are we past 2% yet, or is it still just that cusp?
We are past 2% nationally, but it's like really wild regional variation. From over 10% in California to like over 1% in certain, particularly like rural areas.
Where range might be different?
Where range might make more difference. Theoretically, I mean, it might be range. I think it's infrastructure, and I think, you know, so my parents are on Long Island, and my mom says like, yeah, but like there's no place to charge them, and we're out getting our nails done, and like there's a charger right there. And she was like, oh, I never would have seen that. So I think that when you're in areas where people, the number one predictor for EV adoption is people who know people who have an EV, people who have driven one, test driven one, and it's why like ride and drive events are so great. Because once you sit in them, you're like, oh, this is actually really fun.
Or it's just the car?
I mean, yeah, over it's, I'm making a compromise to do something good. You're like, oh, this is actually a really pleasurable experience.
So I have a question. I wasn't here for the earlier one, and it may not directly pertain to you, Carl.
That's okay, go for it.
How do we know what the demographic of buyers is? Because an EV, at best, if you were a 30-year-old something, and you were to go out and buy one, you couldn't afford it. I mean, we're looking at close to $50,000.
You can get Chevy Bolt for around 20,000 with federal tax incentives these days, and that's 260 miles of range.
So that's what I'm curious about. What is the, you know, the distribution curve here for Chevy Volts, Nissan Leaf to Teslas, Mach-E's and Ioniqs and the EV6, the Kias, and the latter two obviously are not under the federal tax, you know, credit.
Yeah, not right now. I think that we're starting to see a shift. They're like for years, really pretty much like to the best, and we have been like we've been trying to nail this down a lot at work. To the best of our understanding, kind of prior to 2019, if you drove an EV, you were either affectionately a tree hugger or a techie, and you either drove a Leaf or a Tesla. But I think that with, you know, some of like the gas price spikes in the past few years, and the sort of mainstreaming of them, we're starting to see a lot more environmental consumers who have some disposable income in their 30s and 40s. It's usually a second car, like a commuter car is people's sort of like gateway drug, where they'll get a plug-in hybrid and they'll be like, oh my God, I never have to fill this up. I have 50 miles of all electric range and I don't actually drive more than 50 miles that often. So, you know, the satisfaction for EV drivers is strongest for people who have their own garage and place to charge.
Right.
So
So housing's a part of the equation.
that's still the biggest predictor.
If you're a young person and you can't afford a house and you get into an apartment and the apartment is charging hostile.
Or if you don't want a house.
Yeah, right,
Yeah,
right, right,
yeah.
right.
But
Yeah.
many work, you know, places, garages are offering it.
Yes.
I guess the follow-up I have is the attraction is the saving, right? Is the potential for saving over gasoline.
So the studies have found that actually the motivator is still like, the motivator is still more altruistic. The initial motivator is environmental and avoiding gas stations. And then like the sort of ancillary benefit is that there's cost savings, because the cost savings is amortized over years.
Yeah.
The purchase price is still higher. So most people, interestingly, we were kind of surprised to find this, but most people when they're shopping for a car, the out-of-pocket purchase price psychologically matters more. So people are not going into it because of the cost savings. They're going into it because maybe they know that in the back of their head, but they're like, oh, I'm going to do something good. This is a value aligned purchase.
You don't think that a year ago when gas was hitting $5 a gallon,
Yeah, it
that
definitely,
didn't motivate people to
it definitely did.
Motivate us.
I know
Yeah.
motivated me.
Yeah, no, it definitely did. And there was a notable uptick at that point, and then prices, you know, there was a major, that was in the midst of the semiconductor chip shortage. It drove used EV prices, like that was when people started flipping them because people were buying anything they could get. So people would have reservations in for like 4 different EVs and then take one just, yep. And a lot of the car companies now have like clauses that you can't resell it within 12 months or 24 months, so.
With us,
Yeah.
my wife and I, we're 67. I've been driving Saturn for the last 20 years. And I do most of my own work. So like, there's no cost savings that I can see to running an EV. With the other problem that I noticed this year was the electric rates went up to
Yep.
14.5 cents a kilowatt hour and 4.5 cents delivery charge. So we're up to 20 cents a kilowatt hour. So
Yeah, it's,
to get gas at $3.39 a gallon now, I don't see much difference, but the main thing that scared me this year was seeing things on YouTube about if I want to get my battery pack repaired or something, Tesla doesn't want to repair the pack, they want to replace it, charge you $20,000. There's people on YouTube that are repairing them, so they'll just replace a few of the cells and maybe charge $1,000. But you know,
the incidence of battery replacement is so low though. It's really like, I in my earlier, this is my like fake presentation, I'm just covering for another speaker, but in my actual presentation, I had some stats on battery replacements in our community of drivers, and they're all under 5% of like the cars we have in our community. So, you know, we have like 14,000 different drivers and across the board, like Nissan Leafs, which are the oldest and have some of the most, I love Leafs, but they have some of the most primitive thermal management, have a 5% battery replacement rate. And that's for both full packs and for cells. Yeah, so
from what I'm hearing about Tesla is they're very sketchy on giving you any information to do any service work yourself.
unfortunately, I've heard that from a lot of, unfortunately, I've heard that for a lot of car companies in terms of the high voltage batteries. I think, you know, I spoke to an e-Golf driver, Volkswagen e-Golf driver, and he was like stuck between VW corporate and the service center, and they kept saying, no, it's the other person, like, yeah, your battery is degraded, but you have to talk to corporate, and corporate was like, you have to have the service center talk to you. And so his warranty is going to run out while he's waiting for that process to happen. I think that a lot of the car companies have written off some of the older models, and they are just kind of leaning into their new products, which is a shame. It's a shame, especially because there's more demand for used EV batteries than there is supply. You know, if you go, there's a body shop up in Massachusetts that specializes in battery replacements. And mostly it's Volt's old leaves, he does like the 24 kilowatt hour pack leaves. And you have to get on a waiting list for months to get a battery. They don't have enough. Car batteries are lasting too long. They have to get them from salvages and then test them to make sure that the battery is still good.
So what are your thoughts on this? On kind of, what do you call it, like, just building more chargers for cars just across the country? Because whenever I, take people with Tesla and we don't really have experience with an electric car, the first thing they always ask me is, do you have trouble, like on a road trip, like running out of charge in like the middle of nowhere? I think that's something that holds a lot of people back.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on that?
So I think that first of all, the Tesla network is like miles ahead of the sort of CCS network, unfortunately. I know that there's a lot of federal funding right now in the next few years going into building out highway corridors with high-speed CCS chargers. And the other thing I'd say is that I think people road trip less than they think they do. I have a coworker who traded in his like Honda Accord for a Tesla Model 3. The amount he saves, he's in California, so gas is really expensive, and he has a time of use plan to charge at home. And he uses the money he saves from owning a Tesla rather than a Honda Civic, and we'll just rent a car twice a year when he wants to go on a road trip. And it's still, he still works out making a couple $100 and he gets to drive a car he likes. So I think people, listen, EVs are not for everyone. If you are driving 120 miles a day, like my dad drives, still to this day in retirement, drives a ton, like, he would absolutely run out of charge on the highway. Just constitutionally, it's not for him yet. But that's not most people.
I take my Tesla on long road.
Yeah, no, I think the Tesla network is really, really very good.
Yeah, especially in the east, the northeast where we are.
Yeah, and the West Coast too.
Canada, I've taken it all over New Hampshire, middle of nowhere, New Hampshire.
No, Tesla really, they nail it, like, I have a lot of qualms, but that part they did very well.
It's just the Midwest kind of area. It's very neglected when it comes to supercharging network. If you actually look at the number of superchargers there, they're like 200 miles from each other and whatnot.
Yeah.
Here you can find one every 5-10 miles.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just a comment, so I drove to Florida over Thanksgiving using the Electrify America network and had no problems.
Oh, that's great to hear.
From North Jersey down to Florida.
How many stops?
Pardon me?
We stopped the chart.
I stopped about every 180, 200 miles. The range is about 250. However, you can't count on there being a charging station every 250 miles, right? So
You gotta plan with
that. And of course, your quote unquote gas economy is going to vary based on the lead, but you're not going to get that much range.
Well, and here's something interesting actually, is that unlike gas cars, EVs are actually much less efficient on the highway. And it comes down to their motors are so efficient that the air resistance coming at you when you're at highway speeds actually takes a meaningful toll on your efficiency. Whereas in a gas car, they're so inefficient, it doesn't really make a difference.
Interesting.
Yeah, I can totally agree with that because if I go say 40 miles per hour, my Tesla is using maybe 220 watt-hours per mile. But as soon as I go to like 65 or 70, it's getting all the way to like 280 watt-hours per mile. Yeah, it doesn't make a difference.
It's totally different sort of systems to worry about when you're getting 90% efficiency. Yes,
It's just completely off the, what we were discussing.
that's fine. This whole thing is.
I tracked one time with a electric vehicle car that came up behind me on a road.
Mhm.
And a stoplight, and I didn't hear the thing coming. And then I got out of the car, went over and began to chat about how if they liked it and all, the questions. But I understand the fact is that this thing was so silent that they had to build some type of noise into it.
They did.
Did
Yeah.
they?
I think it's That's another NHTSA regulation. I think it's under 18 miles an hour. There's a pedestrian alert system. And like the companies can kind of like decide what they want that noise to be. But it's for wildlife and people. You know, I think particularly like the concerns with like people with vision impairments who are walking around rely on audio clues. So yeah, that's totally true.
What kind of sound do they have?
I think it depends. I mean, it depends on the manufacturer. You don't really hear it in the car as much, I don't think. Yeah.
My wife's car has it. It sounds like this kind of like static noise. It's just something to alert you that it's
Yeah.
there.
Actually, now some of the manufacturers are having fun with it.
Yeah.
You can pick your own sound, so you can make it sound.
I think the NHTSA was not pleased with that move.
Which bus driving?
Pick your own run tune.
Yeah, I think that they were not. I think that they put the kibosh on that
Oh,
last
really?
year. I believe so.
Thank you.
So could you help us understand the business, the name of the company is
Yeah, recurrent.
recurrent business model in terms of your quote unquote fleet? and
Yeah.
How you get the telemetrics and
Yeah, absolutely.
what types of people enroll? I mean, I assume it's a lot of corporate fleets, but.
It's actually not. So we started kind of as a grassroots company. It is just ordinary drivers who have vehicles, who kind of want to both contribute to our scientific mission, and then we also give them stats on their vehicle, kind of like range estimates for today, range estimates when it's really hot, range estimates when it's really cold, projected range in 3 years. And so we get that data via, you know, like your car, you probably have like an app for most cars now. The same like API that sends data to the app and to the manufacturer, we can tap into that. And we pull like read-only data points, so your odometer, your state of charge, whether or not you're charging, the vehicle's own range estimate, and we make computer models out of that. And so it's always free for drivers. But what we do is we charge dealerships and auction houses to have access to our data models, and we can give them reports on individual cars that they're either selling or looking to buy from wholesale, and kind of give them some information about the battery quality of that particular vehicle.
So the data you provide to dealers is not anonymized.
No, we would provide data on the specific VIN that they're interested in, but we don't share the data. We don't share the data from our drivers. We anonymize all of that, and we use that to build a computer model. There are some issues with this that we're working on, most notably with Tesla, which kind of backs out its range estimate, its dashboard range. Tesla assumes a fixed efficiency rate. If you go to the energy menu, it actually does the calculation, but the data that it sends to us and to the app is using a fixed efficiency measure. So it shows no change based on temperature, no change based on terrain. So we're working on ground truthing that right now with, we also use onboard devices to ground truth all of our estimates, and try to figure out how what the dashboard says in any given car relates to what's actually going on. So yeah, it's pretty cool. It's funny. We're really a group of a lot of scientists. And most of us don't have cars.
So the benefit to the consumer or the ordinary
Yep.
driver is information.
Information. And we've had we've been in business for like almost 3 years now. And so we've been around long enough that people are actually using our reports as kind of like proof of care rather than maintenance records when they go to sell the car. You know, if it's a private sale, if it's a dealer sale, then the dealer can look up the car and kind of get some information about how the battery has been cared for.
So based on what you just said,
Yes.
supposing you find out that what's actually happening is not exactly what you're seeing when you're dead, what do you do with that?
So we have adjustments to our models but they're all make, model, year driven specific adjustments. So if we find out that a certain year of ID4 the dashboard range is, you know, some linear factor away from what we're seeing with onboard devices. You know, it gets pretty deep into the statistics. I neither want to reveal the secret sauce nor speak too much about the data science that I am not as involved with. But we do make adjustments based on the real world data that we find. And we have like, our drivers are really engaged and committed. So you know, we get a lot of emails from people saying, hey, what you're showing me is not what I'm seeing on the dashboard. And so we use all of that information to fine tune things. Yeah.
So it's like a case with all electric cars now where you have to have basically a monthly cell phone cost to operate the car.
It's included for a lot of cars. I think there was news this week that I didn't read about GM getting rid of their required OnStar subscription. There are people who don't want to opt into these programs, and we had a program where you could manually enter some data and take a photo of your dashboard, which we took offline, and we're going to put it back online soon. And there also are models that we can't get into the API of, so we can't support Lucid right now, unfortunately. You know, there are some others that we just can't support yet, and we're working on. So we use like an API provider that kind of builds the code for us to get the data that we need, and then we store it in a database. Yes.
How much data is out there on the effect of kind of climate control? So the heater or air conditioning on the range, because
Yeah. No, we've been trying to crack that nut because there's not a ton. When it comes, like, air conditioning has a much lower effect than heaters, which you know from driving EV. Heaters have a huge effect. I know some of the newer Teslas started using heat pumps, which are much more efficient until you hit about freezing. Once you hit freezing, their efficiency starts to drop off and match that of a resistive heater. There's also like a slight amount of efficiency loss just from a battery being cold itself. Teslas control for that, whether or not you're plugged in. Some cars, they need to be plugged in to precondition them. We have some stuff on this page right here. If you wanna, you wanna take a look.
you always notice whenever I turn on the climate controls.
Yeah.
I mean, if I turn them off, I just kind of suck it up, so to speak, and I can get way more range out of it.
Yeah. That is a true story. That being said, though, you probably have heated seats, and
Correct, yeah.
do you have like the steering wheel warmers? Because
Sure.
those are like much more efficient ways, and they often don't pull on the high voltage battery. Sometimes they use the 12 volt, so.
So you're saying that if you're happy with your hands and your foot, then you don't worry about your feet.
Well, so the thing is that like usually because most people have like these apps for their car, they could say, I'm gonna leave at 10 o'clock. I want my car to be 65 degrees. And you do that while your car is plugged in. And so most of the energy used is getting your car up to speed, up to heat. And then you can get in it at 65 and kind of put on the seat warmer and the hand warmers. Yeah. That's kind of the general recommendation for cold weather driving. Yeah.
I have a question that might be it might be more directed at folks in this group who are driving EVs. As it relates to insurance discounts for reporting. Letting your car report to the insurance company. Anybody familiar with that?
I've heard of it.
All I've heard is that I think Tesla's offering insurance because they know, when you woke up this morning. Because they can track all that, the onboard updating. And I don't know how many people are using that or whatever, but I'm seeing, like, when I compare my electric to my gas car, I'm paying more for the electric and the gas cars new. And
What was the price of the original vehicle? Were they comparable?
the original is probably 32 for the electric, and probably 32 for the.
Oh, that's surprising.
32 for.
But I think but I'm with Allstate, so, I mean, I'm in PA too, so they've done the numbers and they figure that, either my car can do more damage or there'll be more damage to
It can do more damage.
cost
It's a lot heavier.
or to fix it too.
Yeah, that's, I mean, generally,
Not
like,
much, I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
200 or 300, 400.
When I went from my Lexus hybrid to my Genesis EV, my rates went way up. State Farm, but now I realize that I can bring it back down if I do the boarding thing, and that's what I'm trying to understand,
yeah,
looking for anecdotal.
And then, of course, you could also go somewhere other than State Farm.
Pardon me?
You could go with someone else, other
Well,
than State Farm and compare.
That's true.
No, my girlfriend has that State Farm monitor thing on the car. We got a notice, they figured out that I was driving the car as opposed to she. They were able to profile it so precisely that they figured out that there was a second driver.
that's incredible.
Is there any privacy left in this world? Is there any privacy left in this world?
No.
That's another.
No.
No,
It's the algorithm as we speak up on my driving habits,
Yeah.
that there was a second person, perhaps you should call us and we should add his name to your insurance policy. So. Interesting. Yeah, so that's an anecdote there.
That's a good anecdote, I like that.
So putting that information aside, are you comfortable with having all that information reported to State Farm?
Well, that's her decision, what she wanted to do. She has that little gizmo up there for the discount, which ended up being a premium because they kicked her rates up.
Okay.
Because she had the thing on there. I drive an old 30-year-old car and still use a flip phone, so.
I was forced away from a flip phone at 17 and I miss it every day.
There needs to be some laws to protect consumers on some of the reporting stuff. Maybe they're, they're a little far behind the curves. I don't think, I'm taking all of this in and I'm going to keep my 97 Camaro running as long as I can.
Well, I mean, that's like, if you're already in it, that's not a, it's not a bad way to look at it environmentally either.
So the future, this is supposed to be better than the future.
But you see, that's not my name.
I know. Are you willing to try, but I don't know, you seem like you're willing to tackle these things. When are they gonna release the Cybertruck?
Oh my
We're gonna
God.
get a $25,000 other than the Bolt new,
I don't know if
long-range
you're getting,
car,
I don't know if you're getting a Tesla at $25,000.
Model C.
I don't know. I think that Volkswagen maybe beat, I think there was some news this week that Volkswagen maybe beat Tesla to the punch with $25,000 vehicle. And there are tons overseas.
Oh, you mean like in China?
And also in the EU, I think that like the compromise really is that when people are more modest about what range they need. If people are like, okay, fine, for an everyday car, 100 miles of range is really fine, and you get a cheap car. Then you can get a 2014 Leaf that works great.
Base Model 3, I'm pretty sure like if you get the base Model 3, like not a long range stuff or anything like that, I'm pretty sure it's in like the mid to high like 30,000 range.
Yeah. Well, and you get the 75.
Model 3, just the base Model 3.
And if you qualify for the tax incentive, you get $7,500 in tax credit at the end of the year.
Right, but isn't some base Model 3 still in the 50s?
No, the base Model 3, like none, like the standard range, not long range. Like
Yeah.
last time I checked, it was like in the mid, by 30,000.
They lower them.
I think they raised the price for the long
They
range.
play with the prices all the time.
It doesn't make any sense to, unless you plan to keep your EV for 10 plus years. It didn't make any sense to, not from an environment, not from being an alternative, from an alternative, angle, but from an economics perspective, buying an EV at 45 plus thousand, even if you put 5 down and get the 7,500 tax credit, you're still paying $700-800 a month.
Yeah.
And the return isn't there.
People are paying that on gas cars now too.
It's true, but there's still many more gas cars under 40,000 that you can pick up.
Yeah.
And then the financial burden and then the return is there. Most people, I suspect, are going to buy an EV and trade it in 5, 6 years. And they'll maintain that
depreciation is not
constant,
higher. We're not seeing higher depreciation on EVs, like that was a big fear, but we're just not seeing it.
even then, I think that the issue is that I suspect most people are financing their vehicles.
Yes.
For the most part, in which case their annual monthly, outlay is higher than than a non-EV car.
Yeah,
And then,
yeah.
they'll continue to be, it'll be the smartphone model. They'll continue upgrading for the perceived gain as opposed to the real gain. And it'll always be in debt.
But that works out super well in terms of recyclability, because then, in the EU, the laws are such that the battery manufacturer is responsible for recycling and end of life. And so in a model like that, it's really nice because GM builds a battery that GM can construct and recycle really easily. And then that wheel moves very smoothly. Yes.
All testing you've done, so the average EV battery, like how many miles does it last?
We have no idea because they've not been on the road long enough.
Just haven't been driven that long?
Yeah, I mean, like the oldest Model S is just coming up on 10 years, 10 years.
Right.
The oldest Leaf is 12, not even in the US, I think it's 11 years. They're, most of them are still going. Yes, they have degraded batteries, largely because also a lot of the best practices were not known, but they're still in cars.
Right, they could still be driven for maybe another 5, 10 years, right?
Nissan said they're expecting 24 years. Elon has said 300,000 on a Tesla. I don't know how much you drive is your business, but
I've
Yeah.
never driven a car 300,000 miles.
no. And then once the car doesn't have the power to propel an EV anymore, because that's a really heavy vehicle, it can still be used. Just because your battery is so degraded, you can't use it as a car. It's still a perfectly fine battery. So there are a bunch of projects that are stringing together old EV batteries for data storage and for storing renewables.
Repurposing them pretty
Yep.
much, or, okay.
Yeah. So it's hopeful. The problem is that you get an accident and then you can't trust the battery. Yes.
So when I think about the future of EVs, as a current EV owner, I've only had it for about 2 years. The only compelling reason for me to look at other vehicles is to increase my range.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
otherwise, my car could last a very, very, very long time. So what I'm curious about is there ever going to be a time when we can truly upgrade a vehicle? So that we can just
Put in a new battery.
get more range. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's starting to happen. I think one of the issues is that if you're going from a car that has a 24 kilowatt hour, like an old Leaf, and you want to put in a 50 or 75 kilowatt hour battery, there has to be some design forethought to make larger batteries fit and make the wiring work. The other thing is the batteries are really heavy, so the structural support of the car has to dynamics still has to work with a much heavier battery pack in it. But other than that, yeah, and I know swappable batteries is something that people are thinking about. There are definitely people with older Leafs who find salvage batteries, larger salvage batteries, and upgrade their car. There's still there are limited body shops that do that work. So, you kind of have to think ahead, find a battery, pay a premium, but people are absolutely doing that. Yeah.
They've also been getting better and better with energy density, so it's the amount of kilowatt hours they can fit in a certain max, right?
Yeah.
There's a auto shop here where I live that actually disassembles those battery packs, just the individual cells. And defines the ones that are duplicate and remix and match to get them approximately at the same level.
Oh, that's so cool. I just did a deep dive with one of my writers about cell balancing, which is something that battery management systems generally do, but if they get out of whack, that's a real problem. What's the body shop called?
Shums, SHUMS.
Where,
It's in Philadelphia.
right in. It's running an informal session.
Because it's usually, because they're wired in series.
It depends on them, there are different configurations, but you know,
What you need is one or two of them to go bad, and then that can take the whole thing. Let's say UMS.
yeah, no, that's absolutely true. Or at the very, even if it doesn't take the whole thing out, it really, you could only charge it as high as the highest one, so you lose a lot of capacity. Yeah. Interesting. I feel